All right, so we're on.
Cool.
Cool. So yeah, Austin, just introduce yourself a little bit. Just who you are, what you're doing, where you live, and all that stuff. And yeah.
Cool. Yeah, my name is Austin, originally from the States. Although I haven't lived full time in the States for almost a decade. So I've hopped around Europe. So I was near Milan for a few years, in London for 4 or 5 years, and now Berlin for the last 3 years. So I'm a designer, researcher, and educator. I focus on like the digital space, so mainly building websites and applications. I'd say I spend about half my time designing and half my time teaching. So I'm a design instructor at General Assembly, and I look after kind of updating curriculum. And I jump in and teach classes from time to time. So I'm teaching like a remote class right now for General Assembly twice a week, part time. But I try to balance the teaching with actually making stuff. So I actually have something to teach. So that's my ideal balance. And the trick is kind of like tweaking that. Like I want to make sure that I'm doing interesting projects so I can bring that into the classroom. But yeah, that's what I'm up to. Live in Berlin now with my wife, 3-year-old and 1-month-old. And obviously met you at CrossFit. You have to mention CrossFit in the first few minutes, right?
Yeah, if you know you're not a CrossFitter.
yeah, exactly. So might as well get that in there. Anyways, that's it. That's me in a nutshell.
All right. Okay, so I mean, we were discussing a little bit before, like life before and after, and after like the COVID situation. And I mean, I don't really know how to call it because I mean, everybody's now talking about the new normal, and it's like the post-pandemic world, and etc. I'm not really. I'm trying to focus on not really thinking too much about it. Obviously take all the proper precautions, but like try to be more optimistic about the future. So, tell me a little bit about how was the kind of like life before, like all the lockdowns, and how have you adapted to it?
Yeah. So life before was beautiful and chaotic. So my wife actually works at Bayer, as they say in Germany, the pharmaceutical company, and she was spent 6 months working at their site in Milan, and so I was like a solo dad in Berlin, still working full time. The opportunity came up like fairly last minute, so I still had projects scheduled, and so we used to travel a lot. So I would go back to the US, I would travel for work as well, to clients in Barcelona, Oslo, London. And, very quickly, middle of March, just the plug got pulled. I mean, my wife actually was on maternity leave, so we had already naturally started slowing down a little bit. But, as far as my work, like everything in Barcelona and Oslo and London that I had scheduled for the rest of the year was essentially canceled. And but then new opportunities came up, actually. So I won't say that they're equal to the opportunity lost, but there's been enough replacement to keep me strangely busy. Like I feel even busier than I was before, despite like not having a commute and despite everything else around me slowing down. So yeah, I would say that I'm weirdly optimistic about the future. Like during this great pause, like it just feels like someone, like stopped the treadmill, so like I feel like I was on a treadmill and like all of a sudden it just stopped, and now I can kind of look around and see what's going on. So I feel weirdly optimistic, but I don't have a specific reason to be. So I like if I actually look at my projects and my accounts, I'm like, oh, I don't know if I should be this optimistic, but I feel like there's a lot that maybe I just enjoy a bit of chaos or a bit of crises. But I guess my mantra is similar, I think, to what you mentioned, which is focus on what I can control, which is basically like the food that I eat, how I treat my family, the work that I'm doing, do my best to, like still exercise. Luckily, I've got one kettlebell, and I've got some rings that hang from the ceiling. So I use these gymnastics rings and a kettlebell to stay in shape at home. So yeah, it's like control the variables that I can control and pretty much ignore everything else. And I don't read the news. I get like the official recommendation from the German government, and that's it. I don't obsess over the crazy news cycle because I'm not sure it's helpful.
Yeah, yeah.
So that's it. What about you?
Well, I was also actually, I took paternity leave because I had 1 month left.
Yeah.
And ideally, it was to help my wife transition into getting back to work from her maternity leave.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we were at home, and as I mentioned before in the conversation, before we started to record, I brought my niece to help us out,
Yeah.
and also to help in this transition, because then we would be both like working professional parents, and we still haven't found a kita or kindergarten place. So yeah, she was there to make our transition a little bit more manageable. And by the time I had to come back to work, I think it was exactly the week that they decided to do like home office, and then the official lockdown was like a couple days later. And even when there was conversation about maybe we're gonna move into home office and whatnot, I was already like quite certain, like I don't want to go to the office right now. I don't even want to jump into public transport. So I don't know if I was kind of freaking out already, but I think it spent the first 2 weeks like checking the stats every day, which I still do. I try not to read the news anymore, but like now that like at some point I decided like, this is gonna pass. It just needs time. I just need to kind of like switch off, and that's how I kind of managed. But as I said, like the transition into home office has been smoother. I mean, I was kind of already there, but now there's like another person living in the house. She's stranded with us until I think September, because flights to Argentina are banned. So I don't know. It's been quite an intense ride, and work wise, actually, I've had more work than before. I don't know if that this constant busyness that's happening, but like at the company, we are still quite busy. Like on one side, wrapping up projects from last year or from early during the year, and later on, I switched like from creative to sales, and in that switch, that was kind of like a year and a half ago. And in that switch, my kind of day to day was trying to reach out and do kind of like cold calling or developing new business or new relationships or try to find new opportunities. And that's completely out, like, because like people are like, the last thing people want is somebody kind of knocking on their door and asking for projects. And we became, or at least I became, quite self-aware that we need a new strategy, and that strategy became into like, okay, let's take advantage that like I think Facebook advertising is quite cheap at the moment. So we are developing like new marketing strategies to promote ourselves, instead of kind of like more using a marketing funnel instead of doing cold acquisition. But we're still about to launch that campaign. So it's been interesting. We've never done before something like this in the company. So it's a lot of learning by doing, I would say.
I'd actually love to. It might be too nitty gritty or for this conversation, but I'd love to kind of get into the weeds with that at one point with you. Just, I've thought a lot about, a lot of my previous business development was based off of relationships, so I'm terrible at sales, generally speaking. Like I'm a designer and I'm an educator, and I kind of like having that role where I'm like, oh, someone else will do the sales. But now, since I moved to Berlin a few years ago, and went out on my own and like started a small business, like sales becomes super important. And granted, there's always been business, but I think the goal should be, at least for me, ultimately is to develop like a huge pipeline of business so you can pick the
Hmm.
coolest stuff, right? So
Yeah.
as creative people, we want to pick like not just like what shows up, but like the coolest projects or the ones that we feel like we're really suited to have an impact on, right? So I have thought about like getting more into that kind of like how do I create a sales funnel using social or using, like the various tools that are out there and get more nerdy with that and attack it like as a real discipline. So yeah, like I think that might be for another day because I'm sure that's, I'm not sure how interested everyone's going to be in that, but like, but it does sound like y'all are uniquely positioned though to create some pretty engaging content or a pretty like cool campaign. Like, I mean, as far as the content creation, y'all have like tons of awesome people in house, I assume.
Yeah, it's very. I mean, our portfolio is actually quite like visually, it's very attractive, I think, and we are well positioned in the market. But we have like the company has never like ever done a stunt like this. So there's
Right.
a lot of back and forth. There's a lot of like discussions about okay, is this the right messaging? Which clients are we engaging? What is like especially on the top level on the C suite.
Yeah.
There's a lot of like they want to do it right, and I'm very kind of like, all right, I'll just throw myself into the water and see how it goes, and that's kind of how I made this transition from creative to business. But um, I think that they like I it's not the moment actually to make kind of like rush decisions. I think like one has to be very sensitive to like the mood of the market, and we basically have a lot of advertising. So most of our revenue comes from advertising.
Okay.
So and I follow a lot of people from the advertising industry, and I see that they're trying to as well figure out what to do, figure out how they can help their brands and what type of messaging kind of they have to craft in order to kind of don't rub people the wrong way, because especially the first 4 weeks it was I think everybody was very sensitive, very shocked, and like this uncertainty. Some people like it's not some people, but I think like overall the general population was like, okay, what's going on? Like governments are shutting
Yeah.
down. This has been like completely unprecedented, So
Yeah.
um, like at some point, I personally had a moment where like I felt kind of like the weight of the whole situation kind of like on my shoulders, as well as recently being a dad and everything, and having to support my family. So I was like, oh man, so what's gonna happen, But I mean, I do believe that, and I saw this on a podcast that somebody said, okay, this marks the end of the industrial era and is the beginning, kind of like the digital or knowledge or information era. So there is some truth to that. Obviously, I think we were already in that transition, but it's just sped up everything. So this kind of like digital podcast, or
Yeah.
a lot of people jumping into social media right now, and people getting used to being on camera, and these new ways of working, in the digital space, and all these frictions that companies and products are going to start to remove. I think it's a great leap forward somehow.
Absolutely. I mean, I think what you mentioned about this being a leap forward, and also the messaging around like you know how you speak to people, especially in advertising or when you're doing sales or lead generation. It is a tough line to walk because the fact is in crises there's always actually a tons of opportunity. It's a massive shakeup. But with that said, you don't want to seem opportunistic. Like you don't want to come across as, taking advantage of the situation. But actually, collectively, we should all be taking advantage of the situation, right? But it's tough because simultaneously, there's tons of people who are having a rough time and who are going to have a rough time for years to come, or who have died from this. So it's a really tough line to walk. And I think that there's going to be some sensitive weeks and months, but ultimately, like, we've got to all figure out, like, how to, like, I think now the great pause is a good time to reflect and maybe not, go out there with a megaphone and,
Mm-hmm.
like, but I think that ultimately, we have to actually assess the current situation, see where the opportunities are, and shift, like, our businesses, our families, and our lives have to kind of be built around those new opportunities, right? So it's tough. It's like, how do you look for opportunities without looking kind of opportunistic, like kind of you're taking advantage of the situation? But fact is, I mean, we're better as a society if we all actually figure out where the real opportunities are and move towards them. So, and I thought about it. I think I mentioned, I forgot if it's before or after you press record, but like, I feel weirdly optimistic. I don't know if it's some sort of bizarre psychology. I know that, like, during like the bombing of London or whatever, like, people, they had set up like psych wards outside of the city, and anticipating people needing like psychological help from being constantly bombarded. But bizarrely, the psych wards were left empty and people just went about their day. And I
Mm-hmm.
think there's something bizarre about like psychology during crisis. Like, even when someone close to you dies or suffers, but if you survive, you actually kind of get this euphoria. So like, anyone who's surviving in that moment, like, actually feels weirdly positive and like immune. But then, like, obviously at any moment, like, it could be you, right? So I feel weirdly optimistic. I don't know if it's a psychological trick or if it's a function of being American, where we're all just temporarily embarrassed millionaires, I think is the quote. we're all like, I'm not rich now, but I'm gonna be. This
Yeah,
So like, I don't know what it is, but I feel like I mean, the dust hasn't settled, right? But I simultaneously feel the weight you're speaking about. I've got 2 kids. I bought a house last year in Berlin, and so now I've got this, like, it's the first time I've owed this much money to anybody.
yeah.
Like, it's, and then simultaneously, like, projects are getting cut, and you're like, but if I zoom out, I do think that I'm fortunate. I can't predict the future. It might be tough for me. I don't know, but like, my wife is in the pharmaceutical and health space, which I guess, individual companies, I won't pretend to pick any winners, but I don't think that is going anywhere anytime soon. And I
Mm-hmm.
also think the technology space is probably here to stay. So like, both of our respective industries, I think long term are well positioned. Um, and I think that entire other industries are just going to like disappear or be like shifted. So you mentioned, like, the acceleration of this change. I think we're seeing it. I think that, for better or worse, the tech space is here to stay. I mean, we talk about essential workers being healthcare and like a lot of the logistics, but as well, like, Zoom has been pretty essential.
Yeah.
Like, all those people work from home, so they, like, they're not deemed officially essential, but a lot of these tech products are gonna, and I don't know if this is a good thing, but they're gonna I don't know, they're gonna take up a lot of our bandwidth, and I think an increasing portion of the economy moving forward. So
Yeah. And have you so during this time, have you managed to develop any I don't know, like new approaches to your business? Have you adapted, like, working from home? How has that changed as an instructor and as a designer affect you?
well, my bike wasn't so beautifully backlit 6 weeks ago. So I've invested in my space, I guess, a little bit. And I think that in general, like, I'm thinking about, so we bought a house, but it's being built, so we're not actually going to move into it till next year. And I'm thinking a lot about, like, how do I dedicate an entire room to be an office now? At first, it was more like guest room, like a hangout space, and maybe movie room or something. And I'm like, I think every home, like, needs a fully dedicated office now. Like, I think that there's going to be a great shift. I'm not saying that some people on LinkedIn are like, the traditional office is dead. Long live the home office. I don't think that that's the case, but I do think that we're all going to need like to invest in functional spaces at home to get our work done. So that's been the main thing, just like uh, you know, I guess canceling the lease on my office that that I had in Mitte, and liquidating some of the stuff that I have in there, so some of the extra gear, investing in my own space. And so there's that. There's like a logistical component, which is just where you work, which I think has obviously changed a lot for me. And I always had this perception that I couldn't work from home because there's too much going on, and like I want the home to be a place where I can focus on just hanging with my family. But actually, like, I kind of like the interplay of, I don't mind if my daughter comes and interrupts me every once in a while. Like, I like having lunch with my family. I like not commuting,
Yeah, yeah.
all of these things like that I thought were, would be a challenge. And yes, sometimes they are a challenge. Sometimes I'm about to start teaching and I'm like, actually, like, y'all are being super loud. Can you, like, go in the next, there's moments where, yeah, okay, I have to, like, adjust a little bit. But I don't know. I think obviously everyone's more on the other end of the line is like super understanding. Like if my kid runs into the room right now, it's like, it's priced in, right? Everyone's aware that that's could happen, right? So I'd say that teaching. So there's the space. There's kind of the situation with working from home, and then there's the practical aspect of I do a lot of teaching and teaching design online. I think teaching software, like how to use this tool, is pretty easy to do online. But the more conceptual stuff, it's a little bit harder. And I think that like the strategies that I use in a physical space, like don't translate that well to an online space. Like I think that I'm gonna need to completely, and I've already started doing it. Like at the moment we use Zoom to call, and then we have interactive conversation in Slack. So I'll have, I'll do like Slack polls or Slack quizzes live while I'm teaching to keep people engaged. We do breakout rooms, we do all that stuff. But I think moving forward, I want to like get a tablet where I can have a lot less like slides and a lot more like interactive, like if I to emulate like a whiteboard in a classroom, not just like click through slides, breakout room. I want to somehow bring a classroom to life in a really clever way, and it's not easy. Like I'm thinking about getting a stream deck so I can do like sound effects. Like I want it to be like quite like wild and fun and like an experience, as opposed to like, now you're gonna join this webinar and I'm gonna click through some slides, and then maybe if you're lucky we'll have a breakout room so y'all can get a break from hearing me speak. Like, so I'm really thinking about the dynamics of how to teach online. So my next purchases are stream deck, iPad, less reliance on like slides and kind of the traditional teaching model, and much more like how can you empower more dynamic interaction, because ultimately design is like such a, I don't know, you need to do it to learn it. You can't just like listen to someone on a screen. So I don't know. So that's a long answer, but a lot has changed, so I guess it merits a long answer. So
yeah, no. I yesterday I was reading like a marketing report on the industries that were actually benefiting from this whole pandemic world, and online education was on the list of the ones that are mostly positively affected by it. Along also with like home training and fitness stuff like that. And actually a funny fact is I think a couple of weeks ago there was also a chart on The Economist about the things people buy the most in these times, and the first one in America was like guns, the second one was ammunition, and the third one was dumbbells. So
I think it's always been like that. I,
Yeah.
I think that's just standard. It's always guns, ammunition, dumbbells in America,
Yeah.
then cheeseburgers. I don't know. No, yeah. I think. I mean, I tried to get another kettlebell, but they were like all sold out on Amazon.
Yeah,
So
yeah. I'm in the waiting list from Rogue to get some dumbbells to do some exercises as well.
Well, you
Um,
know, Rogue is blowing up right now with all of
yeah,
the gear that they're shipping around. They've got to be experiencing. I mean, I actually went to their site just out of curiosity and went to their hiring page just to see like how many job specs they had up. They're hiring like crazy because I'm sure they can't meet demand. So
yeah.
it's wild.
So how do you see online education as a platform? Like how it was before, how it can change, and maybe how it can gain more value? Because myself, I am doing an online 1 year MBA course. I'm almost finished, and I have really enjoyed the experience.
Okay.
So there's no instructor. It's like lessons on an app. It's like very gamified, with a big like cohort of Slack, like a Slack group with they post exercises and articles and everything. And it has been actually like even before the pandemic, it was like I would say doing like group workshops or case studies with people all around the world. So I think
Mhm.
so that's a good example. But you are an instructor, so how do you see it from your side?
So, so the real challenge with online classes is course completion, right?
Yeah.
I think there's two issues with online learning that we haven't. Some places are doing it well, but generally speaking, are a challenge. One is course completion. So, how do you get people to complete the course? Um, and the other is community. How do you create community with in an online class? Because I think community is really critical. Like, if you go back to, why do people go to even like CrossFit, for example? Except for some of the barbell stuff, you could do. I mean, I've figured out you can do most stuff at home. I could actually, if I had the discipline just with a kettlebell and these rings that I have hanging up here in my house, like that's enough to get in shape, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like the resources are there. And it's the same with online learning, like all the resources are there. I mean, they've been there forever. You could go to a library in 1980 and, if you had the discipline, like learn everything you need to know, right? So
Yeah.
the resources are there, but it's the community and the accountability. So it's actually, how are you going? We're social creatures. How are you going to share this experience with others? How are you going to develop connections as well? And then, how are you going to make sure that you not only complete it, but like push yourself a little bit farther than maybe you want to go on any given day? And, I think that there's some, and there's also a fun element. You mentioned that like the one that you're doing now is like quite interactive and like, gamified. So I think there's like, we want to have a good time as well. So those are kind of the three things: course completion, community, and like, I guess just, is this fun? Like, do I want to do this? Right. So I think that the way that we deliver education is going to get more clever, like as far as, you know, I guess like Duolingo or like app based, where we have pretty sophisticated interactions where we can track people and their journey much more closely. It's going to be less of like here's a bunch of information, I'm going to deliver it to you, because those courses, the Udemy, all those courses, I mean, I'm hesitant to quote a percentage because I don't know what they are right now, but I mean, I've read as low as like 5%. I know they're constantly trying to get that percentage higher, so I don't want to misrepresent them, but maybe it's 10% or 15 now, but it's always been pretty low. And so I think like some gamified personalized element, but I also think like, why do people pay $100,000 a year to go to Harvard? And a lot of it's the community, right? Like, how do you actually give people career capital through this experience? Meaning like the connections that they have or the conversations that they have from other smart people, right? Like a ton of learning is like super smart students talking to each other and challenging each other, right? It's not like on my courses, like I deliver hopefully some knowledge and impact, but a lot of it comes from those conversations that happen with the people, and ideally
Yep.
those are people that, like, most online courses, like I might be speaking to another designer who's based in like Arizona, and realistically, like I'm not sure we're gonna like work together, right?
Yep.
Like when I was teaching in London, I'd have 30 students in my classroom. Most of them were based in London, and it was like having compound interest on my like local community. Now maybe local communities matter more, that we're going to go all online and distributed. Maybe it's more likely that I work with someone in Arizona than London at this point, or as
Yep.
likely, I don't know. But I think that community aspect and developing like career capital, yeah. So meandering, I'll summarize like a long meandering response with community, course completion, and career capital. Like how can we actually give people those things that exist in like a in-person learning experience?
Okay. Yeah, well, the course I'm doing, they do have a community approach. So they have like bots in Slack that they try to connect people with one another.
Mm-hmm.
It's not really successful, especially as the cohort like advances in time. I think people start to lose interest. Or I mean, it's basically tailored for people in their mid careers with families, and so at some point you can't participate as much as you want. I
Yeah.
think. But they do have a very interesting like interactive map where you can see all the students and graduates per city. So you have like all these bubbles, and you see like, I don't know, Berlin, and you zoom in and you have like all the contact information from people that have done the course. And I have tried to organize as well with another student, some like group gatherings here in Berlin, so just to go out and drink some beer. And I mean, the turnaround was quite. I mean, we had times where there were like 10 people or 30 people, so it's like that they are trying to, and they give you kind of like their network and their communication just to be able to have a more successful event. But at the same time, like being connected and sharing kind of like the same university, the network kind of grows organically, or you have like access to someone that it's working at Google or at Apple that you might not have had before. So actually a lot of people, well, not a lot, but there's a good percentage of people that are kind of like taking this side online education. You could potentially do it like just by playing with the app in your commute, but I find that, like, for example, prepare like a case study is really really challenging, and it kind of gets onto like it's really tough.
Yeah.
So that also keeps you engaged. And then I connected with people from Apple, from Google,
Yeah.
from Vice, all over the place. So in that sense, I think they actually managed to like narrow down all those barriers.
And actually, what's it called, out of curiosity?
It used to be called Smartly, but in order to get like an official certificate, they changed the name to Quantic School of Business and Technology.
Okay. Yeah, like, yeah, I know my other half is actually looking kind of for an online MBA. So I might check it out. So Quantic School of Business and, was that it? Quantic School of Business
Technology.
and Technology. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So does it have like a tech slant in a way? I mean, you mentioned that you met people from like Google and Apple. Like, is it kind of aimed at the creative class or the tech space, or is it just a general business?
No, it's a general business master's degree, and now they actually got the official recognition, so they can issue official diplomas. So you have to submit your like university grades and everything just to get into the course, and it's 1 year. And I actually once I connected with a fellow American from I think it was Charlottesville. Oh no, Charlotte, in
Charlotte.
the south. Yeah, and
Hmm.
he was a Harvard graduate, a history major, and he actually did the MBA, and we just connected, and he said that through the through his Harvard network, he got like in contact with people that have done the MBA at Harvard, and he says that basically the curriculum is the same. Obviously, it's not the same experience. Like
Right.
it's probably miles from it, but like the topics that like the structure of the curriculum is is quite up to date. So
Okay. That's awesome. I'm gonna check it out. And like, I think that there's gonna be a lot of companies that attack like very specific spaces. So I think that there's gonna be like highly specialized courses and online courses that I don't know. And I've thought about as well, like building a bot on Slack that actually. So say for example, there's like a course that an individual could enroll in, like I don't know, like a design course that's offered at Udemy, or there's a really cool course called Shift Nudge, which is all about basically interface design by one of my favorite designers, MDS, and they have a Slack group and everything, and it's a pretty nice little community. But I think sometimes it's not just relevant that you're both taking the same course. It's relevant maybe that you're in the same city and you're at the same point in the course. There's like, I think building another layer of like considering context
mhm.
would be super helpful. So I've thought about like how to solve that problem, or even at like a large, company like that, launches a training. It'd be useful to know like who else in the company is taking the course, globally, locally, where are they in the course? Like how can you connect at the right time? Because I think context matters a lot. Because like I've even thought about this in the context of like moving to a new city, like almost having like a freshman class of people who moved to Berlin, like it's their first year, or a sophomore class, like it's their second year or a third year, because actually the challenges that you face, depending on like where you are in your journey, are very different, right? So I talked
Yeah.
to someone who's just moved to Berlin, and we have very little in common because they're just like, oh, I'm trying to figure out my registration. I mean, I'm happy to help them, but like, that's not the challenges that I'm facing anymore. That's
Mhm.
not a conversation that's particularly interesting right now. Is like how to register at the burger app or the Standesamt or whatever. Like it's more like the challenges you face 3 years in, or like
Mhm.
so I think context matters a lot, and so I think the more that technology can consider context when they're delivering these online trainings, and also like when community building and connecting people, like I think it's pretty nuanced. It's not just, oh, you're in the same city, so you're going to have a lot to talk about. It's like, I don't know, when did you move there? What course are you taking? Are you a parent? What
Yeah.
point in the course are you? Like, because I've signed up, I tried to join like a creative community, um, and most of the people like weren't parents, which is not a big deal. I mean, I'm happy to like connect with everyone, but like a lot of the events like were just impossible for me to participate in. It was just
Yeah.
practically,
Yeah.
it was really hard. And like there is this kind of secret club of parents who kind of know the challenges that each other's facing, and like if you have to cancel last minute, like everyone's like fine, or if you have to ship things, like there's this built-in understanding that's hard to replicate, I think. Granted, that I'm very happy to have like friends who are not parents. That's not what I'm saying, but it's just there is some context there that is helpful, right? As far as like what you have time to do, when you can actually connect, that sort of thing. So I think the more contextual our education gets, the better. How the current course that I'm teaching solves it is, um, you know, like the course I'm teaching right now, I think is really great. Like we have super high engagement. We have 24 people who signed up. We're halfway through, so 5 weeks. We've only had 2 absences. So meaning
Mhm.
like like we've always had 24 people show up for every single class. Like one class we had 23, and another class we had 23, and they both had good excuses to not be there. So like they're all there, and it's live teaching, so we can create that community in real time. That's not super scalable, right? Like I probably couldn't teach more than 30 people at once and really know who they are and give them that accountability, right? So it's not a really scalable solution, but the other part of the solution is that people invest. The course isn't cheap, so the fact that they invest up front, like, and I know that as well, so I feel like a strong obligation to like be super engaged and to like really support them. But the fact that it's synchronous, meaning like it's a specific time, there's like me and I have 2 assistants who are like giving them feedback, and if I notice that they forget to do their homework, like we'll message them on Slack and be like, hey, we noticed you didn't submit your homework yet, like is there anything we can do to help push you forward? So we but it's a lot of effort. It's not a scalable solution, right? It's not like it's really trying to replicate that in-person classroom online, as opposed to creating some hyper intelligent, super contextual learning experience that's like really scalable. So I'm trying to master the current format, which is bringing physical classrooms online, but I also find really interesting the how do you actually do this more at scale, using like the kind of platform that you mentioned. Sounds pretty clever, so I'm gonna definitely check it out. I'm really interested in this space, and luckily having some tech skills, also positioned to build similar software, or to actually, if I come up with some good solutions, like at least everything on the front end I can design and build. If it gets super complex on the back end, I'll need some engineers to help me set up some databases and stuff, but like but yeah, the possibility is pretty endless, and it's definitely out there, because I think to be contextual you have to focus on a very specific area. So this is like MBAs, right? It's not like a university, right? It's like we're going to focus on this and nail it, and it sounds like they've done a good job. So
yeah, I'm quite happy so far, and the people I talked to, they're super happy as well. So what's your course about?
So it's about like product design, interface design, user experience design, research, product research. So each student has a project where they start with basically a problem space, conduct interviews to find a problem that exists. Then they have to solve it using some digital interface. We don't give them, that's the only constraint. So I mean, they could decide on a traditional application, or they could go with responsive website, or iPad app, or watch, or they could even leverage voice, and use some device. As long as there's some digital interface, they can solve the problem however they like. And each week we have 2 lessons, and we just like drip feed like different concepts. So one might be like, okay, we're going to talk about design patterns and design systems. So that's what we talked about on Wednesday. And then next week it'll be like, all right, how do you wireframe using Figma? How do you export those wireframes to maybe Framer to do more advanced prototyping with data? So like, and this is a part-time course, so we don't go as deep as like the 3-month full-time course, which I actually don't teach that course anymore because I don't have time, so I only do the part-time format. So the real challenge for me is like, how do I deliver a ton of knowledge in a short period of time? Because some of these topics can get pretty technical, so it's deciding like how deep do you go, like what, where do I want to shine the light, without like overwhelming them. So yeah, that's what the course looks like basically. It's 10 weeks in total.
Okay, and this is what's the platform you're using?
So General Assembly is the company I'm teaching with for this particular course, yeah, they handle all of the kind of business side, so I just show up and teach. So they've got like they do most of the marketing and onboarding, and then I show up day one and and teach basically 22-hour lessons over 10 weeks. Okay,
cool. All right, I think that sums it up. We've been talking for 45 minutes. I don't want to make this too long. So if you have any contact info on whatnot. Just I'm gonna put it. We're gonna paste it on the video. So, is there anything else that you would like to promote or share so people can contact you?
No, I mean, I guess, get in touch if you're interested in kind of the online education space, whether you're, working in learning and development for, my sweet spot is typically like companies from 500 to 10,000 people. But obviously, if you're more or less, like, get in touch and we can talk about this. There's lots of problems that I think are worth discussing and solving together. Or if you're an individual who just wants to learn more about like digital design, or you think you're interested in that space, a lot of times we get like graphic designers who want to upskill and and get more into the technology space. So I love talking to those individuals as well. So yeah, reach out to me. I think this is posted on LinkedIn, so LinkedIn's a good spot to reach out. I'm not on there a lot, but I'll get your message and then we can take it to some other platform that's a little bit more personal and continue the conversation. But that's it, man. I also have some Argentines in exile at my house. Yeah, so yeah, my mother-in-law is stuck here until September as well, before she can get a flight back to Buenos Aires. So yeah, whenever we're let out of the house, let's get the families together or get a workout in, or just catch up, get some FaceTime.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, cool. All right, so thank you so much. I'm gonna pause the call.